So without further ado, I will turn it over to Stan Maine. And just a little bit about Stan, for those who don't know him, he has been a member and board member here for longer than he'd probably care to admit. Yeah, he and Tim Kreiderman with others actually created this group in 1997. So he's going to tell you a little bit more about that for those who are new. And he considers himself just a Civil War buff. So someone who is very interested, studies and researches a lot about the Civil War, but a lot of what he's learned has actually been from helping others with research and helping us with our Civil War weekend every year and with identifying things in our collection. And so we're very grateful to Stan for all of his research. And I'm going to turn it over to him. So please welcome Stan Maine.
Thanks, I'm glad everybody showed up on such a nice day. I have called this Things I Think I Know About, the 60th at Antietam. 60th published a history in 1864, before the 60th actually got out of service. And the more I read it, the less I knew about Antietam. And honestly, 10 years ago when we were doing battles during the 150th, I skipped Antietam because I really didn't know much about it. I've been to Antietam a couple times, or maybe more than that, but usually just going through on the way to somewhere else. So actually, very recently I went there with Joel Marsh, and we did the battlefield a little bit, but didn't have a guide. But some stuff will remind me of things. Civil War Roundtable is a program of St. Lawrence County Historical Association. We've been meeting since about 1897. No.
Yeah, 1897. I love it.
I knew that was going to come up. 1997. My grandchildren will think that was probably right, but I call it a loose association. We never actually had membership just for the roundtable, but hopefully everybody will be members of the historical association anyway. And members are interested in American Civil War topics, and all are welcome, and would love to have other people with, what they're interested in. And as you can see, anybody can speak on any of these topics, and I'll prove it. Anybody can. 60th started out, were joined in St. Lawrence County, 8 companies from St. Lawrence County, and 2 from, well, one from Franklin County and the other one from Clinton County. They're all mixed up, just because the captain was from a certain place doesn't mean they weren't from somewhere else, but mostly they're from St. Lawrence County. They went to Washington in 1861, beginning of November, ended up in Washington and spread out on the railroad duty. But they're all trained in small units, by company, because they're all spread out through the from Baltimore west towards Relay House. It's not very far nowadays, but it was a long ways away between the companies. In the new year, 1862, they're even further spread out because they put a few companies from the Washington to Baltimore, so they're even further apart. Their first colonel, that was a West Point colonel, William Hayward, actually was not well liked by the regiment and actually asked him to leave, and he finally left. Beginning of January. They and their new colonel was George Sears Green, who we'll meet a little bit later. He stayed there and he did a lot of training for the regiment, but not altogether. He became general in April 1862, and then William B. Goodrich became the colonel. I'm having trouble a little bit seeing this, but I think I pretty much said everything. Other than in late May 1862, 6 of the companies were sent to Harper's Ferry to protect the Harper's area, to try to protect them from General Thomas J. Jackson, whom we call Stonewall Jackson. 4 companies were left in Baltimore and were led by Major Edward James. Those companies stayed there until about July 20th. The regiment was attached to Sigel's division in Nathaniel Banks' army in the Shenandoah. Later, Banks became 2nd Corps in General Polk's Army of Virginia. If you're not a little bit confused about armies in the East and in the West, is that most of the time the Union talked about rivers with their names of their armies, although that messes it all up with Army of Virginia, since I don't think there's a river called Virginia. And that can be confused between General Lee's Confederate Army of the Northern Virginia. So I'll not talk about that again. Went the wrong way. Early on in late July, the heat of the climate down in Virginia was giving a lot of problems with disease, mostly typhoid fever, which I think, I may be wrong, but I think that's from drinking the wrong water. And they didn't quite know about how to stay away from the rivers. And so they're drinking rivers when they was already having problems from using the rivers for the wrong thing. Anyway, at the end of July, 1st of August, the regiment was actually taken off service and put in a big vacation place for the people down in Virginia.
Like a resort.
It's a resort, that's the word. Probably on the next page. In the White Sulphur Springs in Farquhar County, which is south of Warrenton, Virginia. Not very far nowadays from Warrenton. Still in Northern Virginia. From that disease, there were over 500 incidents of illness, and over 50 died, and many more others were sent to Washington hospitals.
In that picture that you showed earlier, were those people associated with the 60s?
Yeah, actually, I skipped over that. Those were the officers. And I don't know if I can do this by pointing. I don't think I can for Zoom, but if I can see it.
Use the sewer.
This is Colonel Goodrich, Lieutenant Colonel Charles R. Rundich, Captain J.C.O. Reddington. At the time of the Antietam, this is Major Goddard, who was a captain at that time.
Abel Goddard,
Abel Goddard. This is
James, is James.
Merritt. These, I wish I knew who they were.
Down front, Edward James.
Down front.
Oh, yeah, Edward James here.
All right.
And this guy is Wilson, Lester S. Wilson. And this guy is a brand new, I think a lot of these people were brand new to their rank. This one is the newest surgeon, Burbank, Charles Burbank. The others I don't know.
But
But
they had a uniform because they're on leave.
yeah, they're taking off service. There is another picture that I didn't add to this when they're all dressed up. That's a little bit easier. I had no idea who this guy was until we had a Civil War roundtable meeting talking about these, trying to figure out who these people were. And a 12-year-old, I said, he has a different sword than anybody else. And I said, do you know anything about it? And this 12-year-old said, that's a surgeon sword. And he's the only one that didn't have him identified.
They're taking their ease at White Sulphur Springs, and they're all basically in their shirt sleeves because it's a hot day and it's summertime. And you got somewhat of the enlisted men or the non-coms that are standing up behind them.
I think they're enlisted men, and they're probably
It's a very neat picture.
it's a lovely one because you don't see too many not in uniform.
Right. Do you have any attribution as to who took that photograph, and was it part of the series?
It's Sullivan, who's a member of the Gardeners group. Don't remember his first name, but Sullivan was the other one. The that picture was in an old Civil War series by Time Life Books, and was labeled as Sullivan. That's the only reason I know. That picture and the picture of the officers all dressed up can be seen in the Library of Congress. It's there, and you can get great downloads with great detail.
Thank you.
I have to move my head to see the whole words because part of the words block out for me. The 60th stayed at that Sulphur Springs until after the Battle of Cedar Mountain, which was August 9th, 1862.
That was a precursor to the Second Battle of Bull Run.
Yes. And there was another one of our Union defeats. And when Pope came back north, they picked up the 60th, even though they're pretty sick, and took them back. And they were actually only in the Second Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, on August. That was 30th and 31st of August. But on the way, officers went through a open field near Groveton Springs on August 26th. And they're crossing this open field when 60 officers and orderlies were fired by Confederate artillery. One soldier, Lewis White, Company H, probably an aide, was struck by a solid shot and took off his leg. And a few days later, he died. Near there, and I just found this out last spring, that Follett Johnson was a private from Company I. The reason I was looking at it because he was the only future Medal of Honor from the 60th. He's from Brazier Falls, and he was captured near that place, Manassas. and was a POW, prisoner anyway, and wasn't exchanged away after. They would actually arrest them and ask them to say you cannot fight against the Confederates until and paroled, and exchanged so that the Union will treat them until they're exchanged. And I think the exchange back then was a little bit sooner than later on in the war, but I think he was out until November of that year. Later on, it got a lot of difference.
Can I ask you questions?
Sure.
Stan? I think this one pertains to Derek, Derek White. Is that Lewis White? Any ancestor that you know of?
No. I think there's two different white families. Mine's from Richfield to Calgary, and then there's another that's like 3 east.
On the way back to DC, the wagons were thought to be overtaken, and Robert Church, who was the quartermaster, assistant quartermaster, decided to burn them. Later on, he was got in trouble for doing that, although he got out of it because he actually had a general tell him and wrote down that he could do that. As much of that stuff that had been destroyed by Union armies, you had to have a reason why you did these things. So that was a big thing for them. Some of the officers later thought that the wagons were actually not burnt. They decided to go back and try to find their personal baggage. Captain Thomas Elliott of Company F was captured and sent to Richmond and until changed, and both him and a lot of other people were not exchanged away after the battle. While in Washington, McClellan was actually put back in command of the Army of the Potomac. He was taken away from Army of the Potomac and just was in command of Washington defenses. But after they found that Pope was not exactly what they wanted, Pope was sent west, and McClellan was brought back to be commanding of Army of the Potomac, AOP. The 1st, the 11th, and 12th Corps formed 3 corps of the Army of, they were from the Army of Virginia, and they were, put in, connected to the Army of the Potomac. For the 12th, General Alpheus Williams commanded 1st Division, but he became temporary command of the 12th Corps. Temporary because McClellan did not like to have corps commanders that were not from West Point. Williams was not from West Point. Good commander, but he wasn't from West Point. General George Sears Green became the commander of the 3rd. In the 2nd Division, 3rd Brigade, which became Goodrich's brigade. But he became temporary command of the 2nd Division of 12th Corps because the other 3 commanders that had higher rank all were either wounded, killed, or captured from Cedar Mountain. On the march to Sharpsburg, General Joseph Mansfield was given commander of the 12th Corps. He was an older man. He's the one on the left here. He was actually caught up with the Army in the 12th Corps on like 2 days before the battle of Antietam. The man on the right, he was in his 60s also, and he had never had any command in the Army, in the field. He was a staff officer but he was West Point. Probably, I don't remember. I think he was probably in the War of Mexican War. On the right is Alpheus Williams. On the left is George Sears Green. The previous and future commander of 3rd Brigade, 2nd Division, 12th Corps. On the right is Colonel Goodrich. William Goodrich, can't remember his middle name. Bingham, William B. I guess that has to be very important in talking about officers, because they always want to have the middle name and they always want to have it set out. But I can't always remember the first name. How can I remember the second name? On the left is at that time, Major Abel Goddard from DeKalb. He was before that was a captain of Company K. And on the right was Charles R. Brundage. He was actually the colonel of the militia that was the start of the 60th before the war.
Question?
Yeah.
The picture of Brundage looks like that's part of the outdoor scene.
Yeah, he was, but with the in the uniform.
Okay, there's another picture that is he with other officers?
Yes.
In the outdoor scene?
Yes.
Will we see that later, perhaps?
No.
Okay.
Next question.
You had Green and you had Alpheus Williams. They both looked like they were vying for the best mustache award.
Yeah.
And they were really going out there.
It's hard in the field to get out and get your beards were.
Sure. They realized that they couldn't shave every day if they were on campaign, right?
Yeah. So that's at least a week old. They started around September 9th with the 12th Corps, and they followed the Army towards Frederick, I think through Drainesville, so up towards Frederick, Maryland. I think they marched in the rear of it because they marched through Frederick and marched to South Mountain and at Fox Gap, but only the day after the battles. They were in the rear of the Army and they were not involved in that fight at all. I don't know if you know the 3 gaps that they fought in the September 14th. Fox Gap was the northernmost, and then
Crampton's Gap?
no, Crampton's Gap was the most southern part, and I'm forgetting the one that did the most fighting. But it's all on my Antietam story, but I don't remember it right now. They did see for the first time the aftermath of the battle, with the dead soldiers that hadn't been buried and the damage of the equipment and the wonderful smells of after a battle. They arrived at Antietam Creek on the 16th of September, probably in the middle of the day. They stayed east of the Antietam Creek, nearest Keedysville. Keedysville is northern part above Sharpsburg and on the east side of the creek. They marched in late evening and probably didn't. They crossed around 12 o'clock and were bivouacked in the farm east of the 1st Corps, and they're most east of the 12th Corps. And the name of the farm, who owned the farm, was George Lyons. And I'll be pointing that out when the map comes up. 3rd Brigade included the 60th, 78th New York, the Purnell Legion, which is still infantry, Maryland, and 3rd Delaware. And they're all pretty small, you know. When they start out the regiments, they're like 1,000 people. It doesn't take long before they're starting reducing their thing. I think there were probably 500 people that were still part of the 60th or more. But you'll see a little bit later that's a lot less people that show up. There's supposedly, and I said it that way, included the 1st December. And I understand the only people that showed up on the battle at all were 2 officers. So they didn't show up. I think they're sort of a militia regiment from Washington, D.C.
Okay, you've got that as 1st DC Regiment. Was that an infantry regiment?
They were
I've
infantry.
heard of the 1st DC Cavalry, which was, I think, one of the first units to use Henry rifles in the war.
Yeah, well, these were infantry.
Okay.
Anything I've ever read about the 12th Corps at Antietam, they just don't even mention them. So it's not really part of the brigade during the battle. At that point, before the battle, they had 120 men, muskets, rifles, and 7 officers. So quite a few less, considering there should be 3 officers for every company. So a lot of people sick or resigned. They've been in service for 10 months, but sickly and not used seeing the elephant, which was I don't know what it was. It said when they're in battle. They've been in a few skirmishes. Every time I see that, I mess something up. Skirmishes were not hardened veterans. They were more trained, but they were more trained than other regiments. 106 had just been sent down south, I think, in the last of August. Is that right?
Yeah.
And other regiments that were in this battle had only been on with the army at all for like 2 weeks and didn't know how to even. Very, very raw. But they did put people in the battle that didn't even know how to march in the battle. And I think that's why Mansfield was so within distance of being shot at, because he was trying to get some of the new people where he wanted them. And he was shot very soon in the start of the battle.
Wounded or killed, Stan?
Wounded, killed, and died later the day, or I call that KIA when
Mortally wounded in action.
78th had same amount of men as the 60th, and the 3rd only had like 100 men. So
What can you tell us about the 78th New York?
very little, other than 2 companies were from Ogdensburg, most of them from New York City.
Were they also at Gettysburg?
They certainly were. They were right next to the 60th.
Okay, and I think they like to call themselves Cameron Highlanders, along with the 79th. I know this only because my father chose this unit to represent when he was doing reenacting Living History back in the 90s.
Yeah, I really haven't done that much research over them. I am going to have to point here because I can't hardly see mine here. But up on the top here, There's a bunch in here. That's where the 12th Corps bivouacked. You tell me what bivouacked is.
Camping out. Yeah. Was this the George?
Didn't put up the tents, just
Okay.
cooked stuff. But they came in and this right there, and I don't know if it shows it right now, but it was said for some of these regiments were on a plowed field. They were actually freshly manured, so it must have been a wonderful, and it was rainy when they went over too. So it must have been just a pleasant evening. So they got in there way after 12 o'clock and they woke up in the morning when daylight started and the battle started.
Can you orient us on the map, please? And
Um,
it was obviously I would say that's Antietam Creek to the left, the snaky part.
Yeah,
And which way is north? Are we looking north is straight up or not necessarily?
north is pretty much straight.
Okay, and that's Antietam
And
Creek.
this right here, I think was where the 12th Corps was in Keysville, right around there. I can't see it. In my map, when I make it big, I can see it, but right now I can't.
All right.
And they went across the upper ridge. And I think that Joel and I figured out where that road was, and right now it's just a dirt road where they were.
Yeah.
It's probably not more than a couple miles away from where the majority of the fighting was started anyway. This is the Potomac River here.
Oh, that's the Potomac.
Show you how close it is. These red lines are Confederates, probably first in the first part. And actually, I don't know if you can see this, but they actually have a little line where the Goodrich Brigade was and shows you where they got over to the Union right. We'll have different maps, but that's a wonderful map to tell you where they were before the battle. This map is from, I think, the 12th Corps book, a book about the 12th Corps that was published like 1905 or something like that by Fox. And luckily I could find things online and I can make them bigger. I just wonder here if I can do this.
You're doing it. Good work.
I don't know if that helps or not.
Oh, yes.
Most of the 60th was all operated in the northern part of the South. Don't know. I think I got to go back down to get everything on the picture for the next slide. Anyway, they wake up with the booming of the artillery. The First Corps moved on the attack, going south towards the Miller's cornfield. I'm going to have to show you different.
Good save.
Different map to show you where the cornfield is. Pardon me?
You went backwards, yeah. The ball open is there.
The 60th soldiers try to get coffee. They need coffee, same as me. First thing in the morning, and they try to get some breakfast. They were cooking. Anyway, they're ordered online. And I don't know if you know, as a reenactor, it takes a while to get in line. And they're probably in column, 4 soldiers in a row, lined up by companies, and so it takes a while.
So they had to eat their bacon raw that day.
Now, well, they had to leave. When you're told to leave, you leave. But the 60th and Goodrich's brigade is in the rear, so they were doing a lot more waiting than walking or marching. So Donald Brown, which I'll tell you, he wrote memoirs. We have a copy of them up here at the archives here. And he's sort of a funny guy because he always talked about how he got food. It must have been something that was very important. So after when he wrote the memoirs, probably in late 1890s, or he died in early 1900s. So must be that's what he remembered, how he got food other than crackers.
You remember they were hungry all the time.
They
probably.
seem to be.
Right.
So anyway, the whole thing, he talks about that a lot.
Where was Donald Brown from?
Donald Brown was born in Scotland, and he moved to Pierpont, 1860. So he's a new immigrant.
What company was he in?
Company D. He was raised by Winslow Thomas, and as opposed to Thomas Winslow, which seems to get all on the Adjutant General's reports and a lot of things online because they go with the Adjutant Generals as their records, but it's wrong. His name was Winslow M. I think Marshall Thomas. Anyway, he had time while they stopped. He went back and got some food. Sliced potatoes. That's pretty good information. Back 160 years. Donald's here is on the left, and his friend, who's in the same company, David Robinson, who I think his actual rank was corporal, but I think he was acting more as a sergeant. He's on the right, and somebody was talking about the uniforms. This uniform was probably taken when they first got to the down south, and this was a uniform from a New York militia uniform.
You can see the shoulder straps and
Yeah.
more buttons, not just a sack though. But what gets me is he's holding a saber bayonet, it looks like, which means that they would have been issued rifles that were only 2-band rifles instead of the longer 3-band.
And I have no idea. Carol? Actually, the one that went with the Springfield was not this. It was the pointed,
Triangular.
yeah, triangular ones.
This could
So-
might have been a prop. It could have been a dog.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Makes them look mean though, the whole bit. Yeah. I
This-
was with them.
This picture is from Potsdam Museum online, so they may have original. I don't know, but I think it's great to have a picture of somebody who you're actually going to talk about.
Right.
Brown knew that the food that he took was from David Robinson's, and Don offered him to have some of his food. And David just shook his head no. I guess he had lots of other things to think about. I'm sure a corporal or a sergeant has to line things up, march. Colonel Goodrich's brigade was in the back of Green's division, and his brigade was ordered to the assistance of Doubleday's division of the First Corps. Goodrich's 3rd Brigade arrived and met up with Brigadier General Marcinek Patrick, who also had a New York regiment. I don't know very much about him other than right after this battle, he became the provost marshal for the Army of Potomac. So he was never in command.
Was that Doubleday? Is that the D after Doubleday?
That's him. He wasn't doing baseball that day.
He had other things to think about.
That's all we think about now. But anyway, his brigade had been fighting for a while. He was with the First Corps, and he was put on the right, one of the first brigades on the right, on the west side of Hagerstown Pike. So he'd been doing a lot of fighting, and they were running out of steam and ammo. These maps are from, I don't know why this doesn't stick, but these maps were from a bunch of maps that were made for, that I bought a CD from Antietam the first time I came there. And I always used to love them because I could read them and see stuff, but now I can't. Other than I can show you that they're walking across a field. Let me point that. This thing is being unsticky. These are the 60th, 78th, 3rd Delaware, and the Purnell, Maryland Brigade. They're walking across, they're going away from the 12th. The 12th is going down this way.
Okay.
And they're going across here. And this is, I can't see where the David Miller's farm is, but you're going to be crossing the Hagerstown Pike a little bit south, in that field south of the
That map has been, those red and blue rectangles have been overlaid on the, like a topographical contour map, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it gives you an idea of elevation.
Yeah. Pretty flat right there. I mean, overall flat, but when you're in the fields, things disappear. The famous cornfield they're talking about is down here.
Right in the center rectangle.
Yeah, rectangle. That's the famous or infamous cornfield. There's lots of cornfield on Antietam. There still is a lot of cornfields on Antietam, right, Joel?
Oh, yeah. That's good.
So
Have they done things there as they did at Gettysburg, where they buried the power lines and made the business field?
they did not,
Well, in some places like Hagerstown Pike, there's no
Yeah.
lines along there, but
but close to the visitor center,
yeah,
it's there
there's still lines.
when they need it.
Some of the cornfields they have planted now weren't there then, but they rotate the crops. I think is what they're trying to do. But
And the corn looked like it was ready to be chopped. It looked very dry. But I don't think it's the frost. I think they just didn't have enough water. They're very dry up down there.
When was the last time you were there, Stan?
A couple weeks ago,
Okay.
or a week and a half.
Who was your driver? I didn't get the call.
Joel,
Okay, Joe, good job.
I was there too, and very,
very dry. Yeah.
whole Shenandoah Valley. Which
Gettysburg was looking for rain the day after we left, but we didn't have any, and we came back up where it's more dry. They crossed Cornerstone, yeah, Hagerstown Pike in column, meaning 4 by 4 by 4, which is a great way to go through woods, but it's not so great going through an open field. So they were being shelled from artillery that was across. I'll get to that map where they are.
Okay, it's got Nicodemus Heights.
Yeah.
I don't remember hearing about that one.
That's a ridge between Hagerstown Pike and the Potomac, and it's on the west side of the newer Route 65 that they bypass, but that's right in the middle of fighting. It was a trade from the national park so that they didn't have, they wanted to make it bigger because there's a lot of traffic on there. So they traded that land. So this the Antietam Pike or the Hagerstown Pike is pretty, easy to stop your cars and get out and walk away or walk around. But the new one, it's dangerous to be anywhere near that. Nobody slows down at all there. Yeah, because of the artillery, several were wounded, and Donald Brown said that David Robinson, his friend, fell and died instantly. His information said he died. He was shot in his right breast, so that's more like a bullet than a shell. But for whatever reason, Donald said he died very soon in the battle. Now, Goodrich had talked to Patrick, and Patrick really warned him not to wait for extra reinforcements before he went on. But Colonel Goodrich determined that there weren't going to be any more. He was the one he was a reinforcement, so he decided that he'd try to clear out the Confederates in the northern part of the West Woods. I think I'm going to get to a map pretty soon. Cross, and he's over here in the northern part of the West Woods. Nicodemus Heights is over here, and the Confederates are in the West Woods. This one's a little bit later. I don't know what time this one is. 7 to noon, so that's a lot of map for that, because these maps are only instantaneously. So nobody just stays in one place. Videos still aren't working there. Colonel ordered them across the fields towards the West Woods. He has been heard by Don to command them forward, keep steady, aim low. Either when they're crossing the field west of the park or entering the north part of the West Woods, Colonel was seen by several soldiers of the regiment. He was on his black horse about 50 feet in the rear. That seems pretty close for a commander of a brigade, but pretty close. And Don said he was leaning over and petting the mane of the horse, or leaning over. And very soon after the battle, he was seen to shot in the breast and picked up and taken to the rear, probably on a barn that was to the west of David Miller. There's still a barn there. I don't know if that's the same one, but they don't take them very far. But they have to take them away from where the battle is. Most of the battle, by the time the 60th there, was moving south in the cornfield and in south. Green's division actually ended up, I don't know if you know where that is, near the Dunkard Church, across from Dunkard Church to the east, and where the visitor center is, up on that little knoll. Green, when he writes about this, said he didn't know where Brigade's regiment was, because it was taken away from him, so he didn't know anything about it the rest of the battle until later that night. When they're crossing the field, they had to jump around, I guess, a big plaque that said Brigade, Goodrich Brigade, because it's there now, right? So they had to go around that. So anyway, I guess I said what I wanted to say about that. I have been to that battlefield 3 or 4 times, and I never saw what Joel and I saw until like the time before, because I always thought everybody's fighting right next to that road, but they didn't. So it's a good idea to get out of your car and walk around things to see more. Letter in newspapers and also in the regimental history by Richard Eddy said that only the skirmishers were able to fire while standing. When they started out, they sent skirmishers ahead, and they had one company from Company C of the 60th. They had another group, and they were on the right, another bunch of skirmishers from the 3rd Delaware, and another bunch of them were in the front with the 30th also. 3rd Delaware, sorry. The rest of the regiment, and I don't know if this was in the field or in the woods, and I think it was in the woods, because they're ordered to lie down. Must have been a while in the woods, because John Stevens, down in this picture right here, the older man here, he wrote letters to his uncle about a week later after the war, after the battle. And he's a great letter. He talks more about the battle than anybody, but I can't read it. And I think Joel went there, and he says, I'll send him a copy. Maybe he can get through more. He has a pretty rough language, but that was from that time, not from now, right? Anyway, John Stevens recalled that the shells and shot were crashing through the trees, and the artillery, if the artillery didn't hit them with, the shot and shell, that the branches would be hitting them. Stevens recalled later that he never shot his rifle. So just the skirmishers were involved. And this is something that I bring up because it's just to me of how a soldier would think about it. But Donald Brown recalled that while in the march, he thought that Confederate artillery gun, that black gun, was aiming right at his head. He was sure of it. And he said that later on, he thought it was only Providence that he survived. I don't think that people could see, was close enough to see actually face of the Confederates, but obviously when he's walking, he could see a cannon close enough in his sight that he thought it was aiming right at him. The regiment stayed in the battle about 2 hours. A couple of regiments from Sumner's division, Sedgwick's brigade, skedaddled through the 60th. There. Let's get back to the map.
Stan,
Part of
the
that.
size of that again.
Pardon me?
Stan, can you get it bigger again?
Oh, okay. Anyway, it's all being done at the same time of the battle, but about the time when the 60th got over on the other side of the west side of Hagerstown, Sedgwick's coming over from the middle bridge, and he's taken his division of Sumner's division to past the Dunker, north of Dunker Church, and going into the West Woods to do the same thing as Goodrich wanted, clear the Confederates. The Confederates are over there, you fight to the what's fighting you, what's shooting at you. But they were only in there for about half an hour, and they were just clobbered by the Confederates. So after that half an hour, people knew they had to get out of there. So some were going south or north, some of them were going right straight back.
Your previous thing, you were starting to talk about Sumner's Corps going back through the New York 60th line.
Yeah, that's one of those companies. I think they show you a couple, like a Massachusetts and something pretty close.
82nd New York, 1st Minnesota, and 19th Massachusetts.
You could do the 60th and 78th there.
Yeah, but for whatever reason, they're going right straight through them, and it caused panic in the 60th. Officers couldn't tell them to stay there. And I think, whoops, I may have to make this smaller again.
We're able to see the D.R. Miller farm and Nicodemus farm. So
Yeah.
that would locate those.
Yeah, we had to be careful of Nicodemus because there's 2 or 3 of them, but that's the ridge on that side. What is this doing? I think I have to make it smaller enough to do what I want here. Okay. I go the wrong way again? Yep. I went the wrong way.
The incident about John Stevens, did that come out of the regimental history or did you find?
No, that came out of a letter that was on eBay that I told Derek about it, and he said, I can't afford that. So we did get a copy of the.
Screenshot of it, so you read it anyway.
Yeah. Takes a while to interpret his writing too. And impossible for me right now.
So that's where we left off there.
Yeah.
Do we know what regiments they were from Sumner's division?
It did not say in the regiment.
So they panicked and then they caused the 60th to turn around and take off too.
Yeah.
So everybody.
And I think 78th also. Probably the 3rd Delaware. When I've been there many times, but when Joel and I went down to where the Philadelphia Park is, where the big monument for the Philadelphia companies or regiments, Delaware has a monument that says 65 yards north. So it's a cornfield now. Where they were at the furthest where they got. So they were being regiments through them too. With that field in corn, we couldn't walk it like we were hoping to, but we did find out that those West Woods were not smooth. I mean, they may have been eaten by cattle so you could see in the woods, but it's a lot of ridges and
Yeah, the most surprising thing that we saw from the Hagerstown Pike when you're on it, when you look at the Westwoods, it just looks flat that way.
Yeah.
It just looks like a woods. Until you actually walk over there and start entering the woods, it's a rock ledge.
Yeah.
It drops down probably 15 feet.
yeah,
And you can't see that. You never know.
not until you're in there.
The whole woods is that way. So the Confederates, would have had an easy time of it, just lying on the edge of the ridge as these guys are coming across the field. They had perfect cover.
This is also Donald Brown saying they scattered like sheep and caused utter confusion. Did I spell that right? Utter?
Working on a little fun there.
No, Carol corrected me.
That could be under confusion.
I've been writing this for a long time, and for some reason I didn't know there was an E on aid. Now I do. The melee of regiments crossed the fields, fleeing to the north, and they tried to reform. They were shot like cows in a herd.
They're taking heavy fire then.
Yeah, because the Confederates were following the regiments that were fleeing. So it's confusion. I think that they traveled off the field north of the West Point, the West Woods, and ended up into a northern woods north of David Miller's farm. That made them got away from cannoning and shooting from the regiment. The Confederates that they thought they were chasing and pushing back was originally Stark's division, but taken over by Grigsby's, Grigsby. That those Confederates. I'm too much of a northern. I look at my side. I don't look at their side. I'm sure you're fighting against somebody. It took, and while they're in one place, probably in the northern woods, Brundage tried to collect the regiments that had been so spread up. So he took a time to look for the lost squads. The regiment, had retreated. At one time, while Brundage was gone, an aide spelled wrong from now I know from Sumner's command wanted to have the rest of the regiment join them, but the person who was left there in command was a senior captain, William Hyde of Company E. He refused to go, and later on he was actually court-martialed the other way, court-martialed, but he was acquitted because he said, I didn't have any command of anybody about that one company. He couldn't tell the whole regiment to go, and he was told by Brundage to, command, stay there. I think this is sort of the same thing that we saw before, other than you can see that they're new positions. And you know what? Well, we can, but that's in the wrong order. That's before the problem. Yeah.
You can see Goodrich, I see 78th New York and 60th New York.
Yeah. And Delaware is down here, south. That those black things, I think are some of the rock ledges that they talk about. I don't know what else that would talk about. Wish I could see better, but I can't. Anyway, that was previous of that the 9 to 12 time.
So is this like their most advanced position of the 60th New York?
Yes,
Because they're due west of the cornfield.
Yep.
And they're looking like they're facing another cornfield.
actually, Donald Brown in his thing said when they went across Hagerstown, they went through an Indian corn field. I don't know if it's just different species of corn. Is that right? I don't know, but something he knew about that I didn't.
I know when I was a kid, we always referred to the multicolored corn. as
Yeah.
corn.
And Stan, you know, being September, was the corn still standing or was it in scoops?
It was standing until you run
And of course,
run
those
large.
cornfields look completely different because they seed them so close together.
Right,
Those would have been the old fashioned rows a foot apart.
scattered with your hand. Yeah,
That cornfield was gone over there.
After the battle.
Yeah,
that's what they say.
they were totally flat.
That's what they say, but other people argue. Pictures show they might be wrong.
I bet all surviving soldiers probably had a year or two in their haversack. But they could have stripped the field as they were going through.
I think they were. I think the soldiers had something else to think about
Besides food,
besides. Well, maybe Don did.
pick it up when you can. I like Don's plan, get them catered while you can.
That's right. It was after dark before Green's aide found the 60th, and he marched him to the. And that at that time, Green was on the Eastwoods. These Eastwoods are very simple. They didn't have names of woods at that time, but to the east is the Eastwoods, to the north is Northwoods, west. Southwoods is south of Canton, I think. Way down.
I'm like rebel territory.
I don't know if there's a Southwoods, but there probably was for that battlefield.
So they were able to hook up with Green's division after dark.
Yeah, and then they were sent right out to skirmish. So that's from the regimental history. September 18th, no fighting, but the armies recovered the wounded and buried the dead, some of them, and the residents and do-gooders. That's something that they call now, including Clara Barton. Yeah, helped the wounded soldiers, and some actually stopped and helped write some of the other soldiers to write their families to tell them that they had survived. That's from the regiment history. I think that's very interesting. That's the kind of help they get.
Clara was just out at the Wilder farm last weekend.
Who was?
Clara Barton.
Oh, she was.
Yeah.
Boy, she's been around for a long time.
The reenactment events out there, she was there.
So you with the sanitary commission or the Christian commission?
She was actually mainly coordinated with one of the medical units, but yeah.
For all of you that have those glasses for 3D, you can look at here, you can see 3D, but these are the pictures that Gardner took right after the battle. And
How many days after?
very few.
Because it looks like there's already some bloat happening. Those guys.
Yeah, well,
their pants.
yeah. It was after, the Confederates were gone, but it was just a few days after. So
Did he come out of Washington or was he already, we know where he was at before he,
I think he was from Washington, but he's still connected to Brady.
if he was operating out of Washington for Brady, then he would just be a short drive from, get a team of horses and a carriage and go.
Yeah, they just took 95, took a left.
But
This Gardner's,
could you blow that up for us, please? Because these are some of the pictures that changed the American citizens' view of war, because it brought what they call it, they brought the carnage or the death That's right.
What am I doing wrong here?
Can you pinch it with your fingers or does that not work on that?
Control plus is not doing what I thought it did. Control plus, not minus. Anyway, Gardner took a lot of pictures of the dead. That seemed to be his thing. And he put out a display of this Antietam, the dead of Antietam, in New York City, and it was very, very popular. I guess, I don't know why.
If you count that row right there, there's gotta be close to 24 bodies laying there. Dead rebels, are they?
I would hope that the Union was buried quickly.
And they're all somebody's sons.
Yeah. Bess, can you see okay when I make it bigger? Bess?
Yes, I can.
She said yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm walking all around. I don't know if you could hear me when I do it anyway.
I've actually been able to hear you quite well.
Good.
Thank you for enlarging that stand.
The 12th Corps and 60th march south. That'd be on the 19th, towards Harper's Ferry. There's another ridge on the other side of Antietam Creek called Elk Ridge, and that ridge goes all the way down to Harper's Ferry. And when you get to Harper's Ferry, you see Maryland. Maryland, you know, that's actually the
Virginia.
Yeah. Well, it's Maryland Heights is actually in Maryland, across the river from Potomac River. I'll show you that in a couple minutes. And they wanted to reestablish that area because they had lost and captured by 13,000 soldiers from northern. Anyway, they tried to reestablish that area. The 12th Corps did, and on the walk out of Antietam, that's when they talked about the human cost of the battle. Several talked. I don't know if he did. He talked about in windrows. He thought that they were killed right next to each other. That's how come in rows. But I think they might have been at that time when those pictures were taken. I think they were dragged there to be buried.
He talked about Heather's bodies.
They had a formula, they had a system for burying the dead in trenches to do the least amount of digging that you had to do.
Yeah.
And it was I'm sure it was a gruesome job for anybody who was detailed to bury the dead.
That's right.
You like to not be on that duty, and if they had the chance to march to Harper's Ferry, then perhaps they were happy to at least be getting out of the area and going someplace different. And I wonder when Donnie got his next meal, because I'm thinking these guys were on skirmish duty at night. They didn't have a chance to
They had the 18th. I think they could have probably had their crackers
and corn on
and
the
corn. Yeah, corn on the
cob.
cob. Yeah. Now, I can't imagine the mess that they left those farms around there. Just terrible.
Things like that. I remember seeing pictures of the dead horses.
Yeah.
That's hard to bury.
And horses have to be dragged and buried or
burned.
They
burned at Gettysburg. They burned a lot of the animals because there were so many, and the digging would have been just so much. So they just piled them up and then put whatever coal oil, or I guess we call it kerosene or something, to fire them up. But there is a book about the Gettysburg campaign called, I think it's called A Strange and Blighted Land, which is about the aftermath of the Gettysburg battle and all the detritus of war and the dead and the wounded and the animals and all of the destruction afterwards. I don't know if there's any book like that similar for Antietam, but the same thing would happen after any battle.
I think there are people writing about the farms. I think there's a book about the farms of Antietam. It may not be out, but it's pretty close. They marched along that Elks Bridge, and for some reason, they say things in their memoirs that I'm not sure what they mean. A couple of different soldiers talked about seeing a lot of copper snakes, and I assumed it was snakes, but that's the time when they're talking about copper snakes as copperheads. Copperhead snakes, he said in the memoir, but I don't know if he's talking about people or, in Maryland, in southern Maryland, they might have had both.
Right.
Anyway, they were in Sandy Hook, Maryland, which is to the east of Maryland Heights. And then they crossed the river in the pontoons and went back to, they climbed across the Shenandoah up to Loudon. All right, so I'm trying to get to the map. There. It shows you Maryland Heights up to the north.
Where's Sandy Hook? Is that on there?
Sandy Hook is over here. The pontoon goes right into the Harper's Ferry village. Across the Shenandoah is Loudon Heights. And on the west of it, I don't know which orientation they are, but on this side is the Bolivar Heights. The 60th had been there for a couple months before they left to be in Shenandoah and ended up here in Harper's Ferry for a couple months after.
The key to the map shows that north is due north or straight up, isn't it? All right.
Well, I'll agree with that.
It's got that little oval direction indicator.
Okay, that's where it's been. I pretty much said the same thing about what I was going to say. Anyway, 60th still had plenty of sickness, still sent to hospital in Washington, and also they developed their own 12th Corps hospital in Harper's Ferry. I know that my great-great-grandfather was not in that battle. He was in hospital in Washington, and I think he was not sent back until late. He went on 5th of September. I think they sent him back in January or February, and he went right to the hospital, the 12th Corps hospital. So, and by that time they weren't there anymore, so I don't know where he was. It just said they were in the hospital with the Corps. Not only being sick and sent to the hospital, several officers resigned. I think they had enough. They were sick and probably didn't want to. They had the choice of resigning, although they had to be accepted as resigned. So they had to promote several officers to replace the ranks. One thing they did not reassign or promote to colonel, because the regiments were so low that they didn't deserve a colonel.
Do we have numbers before and after?
Before was 210, I think, men and 7 officers. After, I'm going to get to the ones that were.
Because they took some major hits with Goodrich getting killed, and it says Brundage resigned.
Yeah, well,
why was that? Why did he resign?
he was still sick, and he was a little bit older than others. He was probably more like Goodrich age, and he probably had family to go back to.
And Goddard, was he wounded or was he sick?
Goddard?
Abel Goddard.
Goddard was sick. But he was, I didn't mention, but he was promoted as major 2 days before the battle. So the ones that were there were even used to being able to command as they were before. I think the major actually commands half of the regiment. Lieutenant Brundage resigned on the 6th of November. Major Goddard lasted and commanded the regiment until first part of December. He actually was sent as a provost marshal of Harper's Ferry. So he was feeling better because he'd sleep in a house. When he went back to the regiment, he said, I think that's enough of that. And he was afraid he was going to die. So he didn't actually just go on, furlough. He actually resigned from the regiment. Goddard did. But on the way north, he stopped in Albany and got commissioned as the next colonel, but went back home. I think he got married when he got home and stayed away from the regiment until 2 weeks before Gettysburg. He missed Chancellorsville.
It says by November, it says in December he resigned, so.
Yeah.
Moved that up to Gettysburg, so he was out for over 6 months at least.
Yep.
And so he was in pretty bad, broken down shape then, and needed to recover his strength then.
Yes, I think so. I don't know him that very close, but I do know doing that bad because 9 months later, in late September, was his first daughter. So we're assuming he got married.
We're gonna do light duty, that you call it.
Yeah. I
So
guess.
the question here, or this is something just to consider that, so we're talking the medical, the state of medical affairs in 1862. They didn't even know what, was causing infections. So they didn't know what antibiotics or anything. So healing was very touch and go.
Right.
And if you didn't have a strong constitution, you might not make it. If you didn't have all the good things we've got now. So praise the Lord that modern medicine has come a long ways in 160 years.
Even something as chronic diarrhea kept with them for the rest of their lives. It was pretty bad.
And they didn't have any kind of infection disease control. They didn't understand how disease spread or how to even prevent it.
Nothing at all.
I'm glad when we reenact, at least we can understand these things and take advantage of, go into our tent and, pop a couple of Advils or whatever after a long march,
So senior captain JCO John Calvin Owen Remington Reddington was promoted to lieutenant colonel and commanded the regiment until 2 weeks before Gettysburg. I trying to find out where he happened to be, a captain and promoted to lieutenant colonel. I know because he was a senior captain.
It means he skipped over a major. That's fine. So he must have done something good to get like a double jump on the promotion.
Yeah. I think he was a good speaker. I can't see any military education at all. He was a head of he part owned a music store. So that makes you a captain or lieutenant colonel.
Musically inclined, eh?
Yeah, he did like those bugles.
And where was he from?
He was originally from Central West New York, but his father was a reverend and died when JCO is how he wanted to be told by his family. JCO was and his sister were sent up and raised by George Reddington, who was quite a political movement in St. Lawrence County.
Grandfather, uncle?
Uncle, sorry.
Dan, in all our talks, I've never told you a little family history with my connection to Colonel Brundage.
Oh, I knew he went down your way.
His son was my grandmother's first husband,
Oh,
and they had a son together who ended up being my father's half brother.
Huh.
So my father's half brother was Colonel Brundage's grandson. But if you trace the Brundage lineage, this grandchild is never mentioned.
huh,
And the marriage was annulled within a year of the boy's birth.
Huh.
And
Makes you
his birth certificate says Brundage, his obituary says Brundage, but sometime in his life, he had his mother's maiden name. So there must have been a lot of not wanting to own this child.
poor guy.
Speculation on who the real father was.
So anyway, the family heritage has a story about the romance of how the Brundages got connected to the Clarks. But this is, my grandmother is the granddaughter of John R. Mills. And some of you heard perhaps a few years ago, Stan and I did a talk on John R. Mills, who was in the 60s. And our great-grandfathers must have traveled together. And my relative was in and out of the hospital the whole 4 years that he served.
I
And
think he was
letters
pretty
to
close. You think he was not at Antietam? John R.
I have this letter right here that he wrote from Camp in the Woods, Maryland, on September 18th, 1862. And he does talk about the battle.
Oh.
It's only 2 paragraphs if you want me to share that.
Please, let's
Yeah.
share that.
Because
Okay. Well, John R. Mills signed up in Richville.
You want to use the microphone or you both?
No, I
both
think I
closer?
can speak well now, can I?
Like the person watching on small.
This is for our Zoom friends, because some will be tuning in later.
I can hear her just fine.
Okay. I won't be close.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a letter from John R. Mills to his wife, Jane Aldous Mills, dated September 18th, 1862. And I'm reading a typed copy, but I have the scan of the original. So, once more, I take my pen to inform you that I am well and hope these few lines will find you enjoying the same blessing. I have but few moments to write, for I know not how soon we may be ordered in line. We are near the enemy lines. We had a severe battle in which the 60th participated. Some were killed, some wounded, but none of our company, except slight scratches.
which is odd because he's in Company D. Robinson's.
But just a minute, he's not right there.
Yeah.
I witnessed the battle, but was not engaged in it. I had just come up with the army and had not found my regiment with them. So talk about the confusion of where everybody was on that particular day. This morning it is beginning to rain. I must close. And then he does dash. Our colonel was shot, died in about 2 hours. Goodbye. This from your affectionate husband, John R. Mills.
Gives a good timeline of how long Goodrich survived.
Yeah.
That shot.
There is a lot more information about Colonel Goodrich in the history. You have to pick and choose what you want to talk about. And
The mentions is Black Horse. I wonder what we knew the name of his horse.
Don Brown knew. He saw it. He remembers him. Didn't remember his name, but name of the horse. Yeah, for the Black Horse.
It's interesting, if John Stevens wrote basically the same thing. Nobody was killed in the regiment, their fingers shut off.
Is that what he said?
Yep.
Huh. It's sort of funny because that David Robinson was killed,
Yep.
and that's certainly not just wounded.
Battle on the 17th saw men fall in every direction. We did not get one killed, only one man out of the company. We had some wounded, some got their fingers shot off. I never got a touch at all, but we got shot wounds.
What was that you were reading?
It's on a letter from John Stevens sent to his uncle.
Which company?
D.
D.
No, he's from Company K.
K.
I'm sorry, he's from Company K.
And Derek, what date was that letter written? How long after the battle?
Not that long.
No, I don't think so.
And that's to his uncle. I always consider that who they're writing makes a difference on what they're going to say. He's not going to say a lot about his wife to his wife, how hard it was. I have another letter that was from a pension record for his mother. And the guy wrote, he said that he talked about the soldiers in row, that died in windrows, and that they were a hard looking bunch when I saw them. But I would fight even harder if I could get this war to end, but it probably won't. So unfortunately, that soldier that wrote that died in Gettysburg. Company I. Okay, Winslow Thomas was promoted to major. Oh, the butcher list. Colonel Goodrich killed in action, a couple hours later. I call that pretty much during the battle. Robinson, KIA in Brest. Frederick Hoxie didn't say where he was wounded, but this Lewis Thomas died of wounds that was shot by the same bullet that killed Hoxie. So it went through Hoxie and got the guy behind him. William Blake died at least a week or later. William Blake was noted in a regimental history as missing, probably killed, but never mentioned anything about him later on. And their regimental history was published a year and a half later. So, but on something that's really interesting to see is Antietam on the web said that he died in Hagerstown. Didn't say when, but he died in Hagerstown in hospital. There were 19 wounded, of which 4 died later, so more than just Thomas died. And there were 9 missing, but it says, all I can say what they say, most returned after. So, but I didn't see anybody else that was reported as absent without leave. That's about all I had. Like I said, Joel and I went down. Probably could have used more time in Antietam too. Well, we could have used more in both the battlefields, but you had to pick and choose what you wanted to do. So the 60th plaques were like 3 or 4 different plaques. One is where they were when they bivouacked off of that road. Another one was with green right by the Dunker Church. Another one where they crossed. And another one was on a little short avenue, which is made by the National Park, called Stark Avenue, which is a short road that goes from Hagerstown back to the newer 65, I guess, Maryland. Yeah. And it was a lot further down that road than what I remembered before. So going there a couple times helps you remind certain things.
There's a nice hike that we did through the West Woods too. It took us over to the new 65, which, like you said, you don't want to stop a car and look at the lines there, the traffic's just whizzing by. So the only real way to see it is to hike back in there, and then you can take your time.
They have trails through that whole park that you could walk on those park and never be on the road at all. Lots and lots of them. They're very good paths. And a lot of the stuff, I have another great uncle who was killed at right behind the Dunker Church, where his company, his regiment, was supposed to be with Sedgwick, but instead of going to the right like the rest of Sedgwick, they went to the left and were really clobbered first by McLaw's and Walker's divisions.
Which ancestor is that, Stan?
His name was Jesse Jacobus. He's on my mother's side. My mother's grandfather was a Civil War soldier. So that shrinks history a lot.
What regiment was he in?
34th New York. They're the Herkimer County, but my uncles were from a company out of Steuben, Bath, New York. I found the most information about the family from the pension record for his mother. Didn't know anything about my great-great-grandfather's death or anything. Tells all about him. And it's also very, very sad to read those things because they had to be very specific about everything. You know, when they were married, if you didn't have a certificate, you had to have affidavits saying who was there and things like that. So if you get a mother's pension, you get a lot of family information. I'm still in the mode to try to get more military records for a lot of these officers. I'm still confused about JCL Reddington and
How he advanced so quickly.
yeah, that one I sort of know, but he was not well liked by the people that wrote the regimental history. And the family, I talked to the family quite often through email until they got a pension record and they didn't get a military record. And after they got that, they never wrote back. So I don't know if people move, but I have a lot more questions about him that I didn't know. His great-great-granddaughter said he had he could speak very well. So he was actually in the Company K of the 18th New York. They went with the 16th, but they had extra soldiers, so they put him in the 18th. Quite a few of that company didn't want to be under a Democrat. So the original colonel of the 16th was a West Point, but he was a Democrat, so they didn't want to be on the same regiment as a Democrat. So politics don't change. Hopefully a little bit less, but then I'm not so sure as it today.
Excuse me. I just wanted to make a comment. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I wanted to thank you for doing this and for making this available on Zoom. I'm in Wisconsin, so obviously can't attend these in person. I got quite excited. I knew that Michael Crowley was not at Antietam, but I got quite excited when you showed that picture about Sulphur Springs or from Sulphur Springs.
Yes.
Because his military record shows that he was sent to Washington from Sulphur Springs.
About 5th of September or somewhere like that?
Actually earlier than that.
Okay.
Well, it just says the records for September 1862.
Yeah.
Is that the date of the photograph is?
So he
September.
was a Crowley?
Yes, he was a Crowley. This is not my ancestor, Michael Crowley. He's not my ancestor. He's my ancestor's brother. There were 6 Crowley, excuse me,
Yeah.
7 Crowley brothers in the Civil War. From,
Yeah, I know. I don't know the family, but I've seen that family. There was a lot of them,
yes.
including one by the name of Florence, which really confused me.
Well, I
That's
have
a
to
male
tell you
thing
what,
back then.
if you have a moment, I'll just tell you briefly about that. So there has been a Florence Crowley in every generation of my family, going back to the original Florence Crowley that settled in Potsdam from Ireland. Florence is an Irish first name for men. My brother is the last one. My brother Florence James is the last one. He would not name his son Florence. But
Oh,
thank you
shoot.
so much for this. Thank you so much. I'm glad that I tuned in.
I'm very happy that you did that too. And one more little thing I have to look at about the Crowleys. Yeah.
Would you
I-
find a picture of the white sulfur springs and see if you can enlarge that for Bess Crowley to check out, and we can see it also in the enlarged form?
I can now tell you that you can see this on the Library of Congress,
I wrote that down.
and you can get some great photos, not photos, but digital things that are very, very high detail. So you can make things a lot bigger than that page right there.
Yeah. I am writing a book about the Crowley brothers and will be donating a copy to the St. Lawrence Historical Society, but don't look for it anytime like real soon.
There's also a regimental history that was published in 1864, and that's online and archive. I think it's called archive to get that. I get it by searching for Richard Eddy, Eddy, and I own one of the books, but I look on there because it's easier for me to make it bigger so I can read than the small book that, I mean, it's not that small, it's 300 some pages, but
I wrote that down too as one of my points of reference. So thank you again.
you're very welcome.
Again, Stan, question? Oh, go ahead.
Just a basic question. This is fabulous because I don't know a lot of this stuff. But when the 60th was formed, I imagine for the enlisted and the officer, there was no end date. It's when the war ended.
No, it was at the time the 60th was, it was 3 years.
3 years.
Beginning in 1861, 9 months, a year, 2 years for the 16th, but they didn't like that.
For
So
both the officer and the
officers had a different situation. Maybe Roger could tell me more about that.
resign anytime. That was my next question. When I heard you keep saying about resign, I heard officer, but the enlisted would not have the option to resign.
No.
Okay, that's true.
If the officer died, they can get out too.
Well,
But
yes.
but the Confederates joined up for 3 years, and then they joined up for 9 months, and pretty soon the government said, no, 9 months, not going to do it. So you could be for 2 years, and then they changed it to 3 years, and then they said for the rest of the war. They kept on changing it.
Oh, the duration.
Yeah. So
For the benefit of Bess and anybody else who will be watching this, could you tell a little show and tell about what you brought?
oh yes, I don't know. Maybe if I bring it over there. This is a sword, I guess, very similar sword, an officer's sword that was up in the archives, or the collection. And this one is a soldier that was actually a lieutenant from the 60th.
If you go in front of your computer, she can see it.
Oh, that's what I have
That's
to
a good
do.
idea.
Yeah, I forgot what I was doing when I got over there. Can you see this? Best?
You'd have to hold it up, a very limited, yes, yes.
Okay.
And
This is
again, I'll have to tell you, so my cousin, one of my Crowley cousins has a sword, a Civil War sword. I have not been able to pry it out of his hands. I'm trying at least to get a photo for my book, but that is cool. That is very cool.
So explain about the scabbard and what you.
This is a scabbard that was owned by Lester S. Wilson. And he was actually in this picture in the bottommost left shoulder. He's sort of leaning over next to the one in a Scottish type hat, beret.
Can you minimize that photo a little bit so I can see that corner?
Maybe move it up a little bit.
Can I do that?
Yes.
Yeah, he's the one in the bottom left. I don't know if he has a beret or whatever he has, but anyway, he was actually just promoted to lieutenant colonel, but during the battle, he was a temporary sergeant major, but was with Colonel Goodrich. And he's the one that picked him up, took him back to the barn, and was with him when he died. Colonel Goodrich, officers get a little bit extra. He was sent back to, I don't know, Washington or Philadelphia or Baltimore, and prepared and sent north. And he lived on the other side of Judson Street, which is, right behind us here. And he was buried in the backyard where he lived. Unfortunately, that house is gone, and not very much longer, in the mid 1880s, he was sent to Evergreen Cemetery. But by early 1900s, the family didn't think it was being taken very careful of the gravestone. So he was unburied again and taken down to Brooklyn, Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. And he's still there as far as I know. Hasn't moved yet since after that I know of.
There's a lot to, you know a lot about Lester Wilson.
Yeah.
So ultimately he ended up in Bozeman, Montana after the war. And there's still Wilsons out there that have come here to talk to Stan about the family and that sort of thing.
This is the fourth, the person who gave us is the fourth Lester S. Wilson, although his name is called Casey. But he's a great guy. He came up here, and I took him around the county and showed him where his ancestors were buried and treated him so well. When he got home, he sent this scabbard to the Historical Association. And this was, he carried during Chancellorsville. He was the adjutant at that time. And he was hit by a grape shot, which seems to match pretty well with that little dent right there. And that probably saved him there, but it put him in, out of commission for until a little bit after Gettysburg. So that was May 3rd, and he didn't get back till the 7th or 8th of July.
He was a general in the end.
He became a general, attaboy general, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, because he got that the next year. He was the last colonel of the 60th. So when I went to Antietam, we went to the shop where you shouldn't be when you're like you, where you like those things. And I got this, I knew it. It said in the regiment that he was hit by grape shot at Chancellorsville. He was, they just said the adjutant for the regiment. So anyway, he went on, became captain of Company F, moved up with the generals in a brigade above, and was assistant adjutant, or one of those things, assistant adjutant, I think. And it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of stuff for the brigade. And then went with Sherman with the brigade commander. And then as a way north, he was moved back to the regiment and became the last colonel. He was lieutenant colonel at the time. For the same reason why Goddard wasn't promoted right away until they had enough people back. The regiment was 120 men at Antietam. I don't know what it was at Chancellorsville, but by Gettysburg, enough people had returned, had 255 plus 7. I can't remember the officers. So they were regaining. When they went out right soon after the regiment, about 2 months later, the regiment was sent to the west at Chattanooga and was with the Western armies from there until the end of the war.